Good to be alive in this land of ours. Good to drive in this land of ours.
Hello, Canadian hockey fans in the United States.
Good evening, hockey fans. I am not Glenn Dreyfus, Steve Paikin, Kevin Shea, nor am I Paul Patsko, the hosts you usually see here, but I am Tracy Wilson for my rookie night hosting Hockey Time Machine. You usually find me at Tracy Wilson Writing Life, about positive living and finding the extraordinary in ordinary life, and some of the lessons that my own NHL dad taught me. But tonight, I am excited to be here with you, leading the conversation about other NHL dads, like Scotty Bowman, Mike Corrigan, Keith McCreary, Jim Nielsen, and Ron Wilson. And these are men that you know through the hockey lens, but tonight we're shifting the focus so you can look at the personal side and family life, the nitty gritty and the down and dirty. It is not always easy being a hockey family, and it's likely not at all to be what you might think it is. So tonight we're going to look at life and lessons growing up with an NHL dad, and you'll likely learn a few things about these men that you did not know before. A little later, we're going to hear from the daughters of two of the best coaches in NHL history, but for now, we start with the players' girls. I want to introduce our guests for the evening. We've got Darcy Wade with us, whose father is really the epitome of underdog. What he overcame was unbelievable and an example for his children in many ways. Michelle Corrigan Haddock is also here. Her family life in hockey changed in one night with her father's career-ending injury. We'll talk about that and the impact on her family and also her life growing up as an NHL daughter. And Wendy Mccreary also joins us. Her father wasn't just a player, but he was a leader, and he took a stand and changed the outlook for NHL alumni. And now Wendy follows in his footsteps. I want to welcome all of our ladies and all of you as well. We appreciate every one of you being here. So let's start with Darcy Wade. Darcy, I love, have a heart for the underdog. I will root for any underdog out there. And boy, if there was ever one, your dad, Jim Nielsen, was it. I mean, four-time all-star defenseman who played 16 seasons in the NHL in the 60s and 70s, 12 of those with the New York Rangers, and then with the defunct California Golden Seals and Cleveland Barons, finished his career in the WHA with Wayne Gretzky and the Edmonton Oilers. And he was voted a top 30 Ranger of all time in 2017. And then 3 years later, the Hockey News included him in the top 100 defensemen of all time. I mean, what he had to overcome, though, I mean, those accolades, like most, they didn't come without a lot of background and a lot of backstory. He was a tough guy who held the line. And before we kind of get into what he had to overcome to get there, I'm curious to know from you, was the guy who was he was a tough guy on the ice. He could hold the line. Was that the same kind of guy who came home to you after hockey games?
No, no. It's sometimes funny when you read things, in newspaper articles or magazine articles growing up and even, current when, he played tough. He played very fair and tough. I think in Dad's era, he was probably one of the bigger players in the NHL. But at home, no, not at all. Dad was, if for all that knew him, not just us kids and our family, he was very gentle, kind dad in person, and he was really quite quiet, and he was very, very funny. He had a really kind of good dry sense of humor. So no, not tough at all. With us. I mean, I guess yeah, I wouldn't call him tough at home. No, he was more of a just gentle, quiet guy. Yeah.
I love seeing the childhood photos. They're nostalgic and they're sweet. And it's, I don't know, it just adds sort of a whole nother layer of getting to know the men who were so tough on the ice.
Yeah, like that's a total dad picture, right? Like that's
Yes.
that was my younger sister and I. And yeah, no, we cherish that picture. We always have, but yeah, those are the things that's what we see, and that's not really what the public don't often get to see pictures like that. So I'm glad that we could share that tonight. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's important too. There are a number of reasons that it's important that people who admire these men, who see them as being sort of one-dimensional, actually get to know the additional dimensions of them and their families too, and the effect of the effect of the game on the family. You've been a big sports fan since you were a girl, even to the point of not being able to wait to hear about your dad's games and who scored, and you'd go to bed and not know that. And tell me about the little notes that you'd leave for him.
Oh yeah, so before I was quite young when we lived in New York. From when I was born till I was 10. And because of my age, I couldn't, very rarely did we go to games unless there was an afternoon game. And so, yeah, I would leave a note in the kitchen every night, every game night. So when Dad and my mom would come home, it would always be like, dear Dad. And then he'd have to, like, what was the score of the game? Who got the goals? And I was like, did you get a goal or assist? Yes or no? Did you get a penalty? Yes or no? What for? And so then he would put it by my bedside table, and then so as soon as I woke up in the morning, I would read it, because he would, they would get home later at night, so I'd get up and be off to school. We would not often see Dad in the morning after a game night, so because he'd still be sleeping. Yeah.
Such a sweet story. I love that. Well, you have a brother and a sister.
Yes.
And it's different growing up being a hockey son than being a hockey daughter in many ways. At least I think so. In what ways do you think that's the case? How was his experience with access to the dressing room and things like that different than your experience?
Well, I had zero access to the dressing room, which was fine. But it's funny that you say that, because I remember when I think about that, my sister and I would always have to go to the wives' room after the games, and my brother would just go bolting down into the dressing room, whether it was a game day or practice. And he would go in there, and, he'd be gone for, like, he wouldn't come out till Dad came out, and we'd be, waiting and waiting. And then he would come out, and he'd always be like, with Dad, and they'd be joking around with some other players, and the trainers would be handing my brother hockey sticks and tape and gum, and my sister and I just be like, wow, like he gets all this. Not that we would, I don't know what we would do with all that stuff, but anyways, he just, the laughing and joking, and he just had that kind of experience that we didn't at all. So it was, I don't know that we were jealous, but maybe a little bit at the time, but yeah. So
Yeah,
and my brother played hockey too, so he loved doing that. Yeah, he would talk about when he was a kid, like playing road hockey, and he would have these sticks of all these players on the team, and he was just using them for practice, when most other kids in the world would just go nuts to have one of those sticks, and he's just playing road hockey with them.
Yeah, it's amazing what's ordinary and what isn't. Yeah. I noticed that difference too, growing up with my dad as an NHL coach, that my brother had a different relationship with hockey than I did. And it's an interesting difference. But one of the things that I'm most fascinated about with your family is that your dad, I mean, while he had quite a career. He is sort of a messenger for anyone who has a dream that if you are determined enough that you can do it. I mean, here he was, his incredible story begins long before the accolades as a 5-year-old whose mother was suddenly gone, and he and his siblings ended up in an orphanage. What was that life like for him? That's a rough way to start.
Well, yeah, I mean, I guess it's probably it's not ideal. I mean, anyone could, you know, could look at that situation and say that, you know, isn't an ideal family life or experience for young children to grow up, you know, basically without both their parents. I think, and my dad, his whole life, I never remember him ever saying anything bad about that, though. He was very actually grateful for his experience at the orphanage, and I think he just always was. He never ever said anything complaining about that. I mean, he just didn't. Like, there's his sorry, I think he felt he didn't know. I think he felt that he got his education. He felt, you know, there was, you know, care and support as best as could be possible there under the circumstances of people that, you know, weren't your own parents. He had his sisters there for most of the time, and my dad actually felt fortunate, which I think some people would, you know, kind of wonder why he thought he was fortunate because of being put in the orphanage. But I think he just never knew what his life would have been if it wasn't for that. Like, would he ever have, you know, become a hockey player, you know, if he hadn't have gone there? And so I think he looks back at it, or he looked back on it fondly. And when we were young kids, the orphanage was still open, and so he would take us there, and we met some of the nuns and people that worked there that, you know, and so yeah, it isn't ideal. He didn't really know his parents at all at all. I think his dad was still alive for a while, and so I think he knew him a little bit, but due to the circumstances of the family, it probably was the best place for them, in all honesty. Yeah. So.
Well, obviously he's a man who's sort of grounded in gratitude. I mean, he was someone who appreciated what he had rather than focusing on what he didn't have. But he also had the hard knocks of not just having an unconventional, to say the least, upbringing, but also being an Indigenous hockey player in the NHL, which was not easy, especially in the era when your dad played. In what ways did you see that come into play? And in what ways did he experience racism in the league? And how did you become aware of that?
You know, that's another, like, first of all, like, it's I never ever, like, it's interesting. Like, you look at, like, to me, he's my dad. I never looked at, like, my dad and his sisters are visibly Indigenous, and so, you know, anyone could look at them and think that, but I just never ever thought of my dad like that. And and because he's my dad, like, he's just like, there's no he's your dad. Like, that doesn't, none of that matters. It shouldn't matter for anyone. But he and so he never, my dad never, again, if you go back to, he was always the same. Like, he didn't complain about that. He didn't bring that up. I think some of his teammates probably would have even not really known that was there, but it was there. Like, I think, you know, it can be very, you know, subtle, the things that are said on the ice that aren't you know, maybe no one else hears. I don't think, you know, we did an interview last year, a podcast, my siblings and I, and Vic Hadfield, and someone asked us that same question, and Vic was like, if they had heard anything or seen anything, like the Rangers, they were a family, they never would have, like, they would have shut that down. But I know it happened. I know it did, but my dad never complained about it. He played the game. He just held his head high. He did his talking on the ice. And I think as he progressed in his career and had some success, I think he got respect for that. And he just never, I'm sure when things were said, it probably like bothered him, but he didn't let it bother him either. Like he just kept going. And that was my dad. He just kept going and doing his job.
Well, but you first became aware of this too as a child, and in a not very kind way, as often happens with children. But as a girl in Saskatchewan, all of a sudden this whole ugly issue was raised to you as well. And tell me about that and how you handled that.
Well, it's there's racism everywhere in the world, and so I think in Saskatchewan, where we were from, and I haven't lived there for a lot of years now, but as a young kid, I guess in the 70s, there was, kids would say things to me about Indigenous people and they're this and that, like in a derogatory sense, and knowing that I am, and my dad was, they knew that, and it was mean, I thought. And I just, basically, you just kind of have to try and put a stop to it. In that, I didn't agree with what they were saying. And, people are going to think what they're going to think, but it doesn't mean that you have to accept or just you don't have to put up with that. And I don't think I did. Like I think I was maybe I was young, so I might have been a little naive to all that too. But I also made sure that I let people know that I didn't agree with what they were thinking or saying.
And then fast forward, you'd have thought that would have gotten better as time went on, but you shared with me an adult experience that sort of highlighted what your dad faced with such grace as you traveled together. Can you recount that for us too? It's a very poignant story.
Yeah, it actually, in all honesty, Tracy, was like the first time I ever, witnessed, I think, maybe not the first time, but the first time, like I think sometimes people would look at, if I was with dad, because I not dark like my dad, I guess, and people were like, who are you with? And I'm like, that's my dad, like, that was my dad. Like, what are you talking about? And but we were in the airport, we were coming back from Saskatoon, and we were leaving, we were all had a family celebration about 5 years ago, and dad and I were in the airport, and we were going through security. We were in the lineup to go through security, and we were just talking and waiting in line, and he said to me, he goes, they're gonna check me when we get up to security. And I go, what do you mean they're gonna check you? And he goes, well, they're gonna go through all my stuff. And I go, oh, that's random, Dad. They do that. I've been checked before too. And he goes, no. He goes, I always get checked. My dad is, at this point, he's 75 years old. And so we get up in the line, and we're kind of like side by side. And sure enough, the security guards made him take all his, shaving kit and his bag and everything. And I looked, and I just felt rage. I was so upset, and I just couldn't, and I didn't get checked. I mean, I have been, but I just, and anyways, and then I was done before him, and they're still going through his stuff. And I just wanted to say to the security, I just wanted to like grab dad's stuff and go like, just stop it. Like, he's like, there's nothing in there, you know, and he's just like, he's the nicest man. I can't believe you're doing this. And then anyways, after we left, and then we were walking, you know, through the airport more, and he goes, see, I told you. And that was, and even how he said it just made me so sad. It really did. I just was like, I just, it bothered me for weeks after that. And bugs me now to even thinking about it. But yeah, but that would be the first time that ever I kind of noticed like him. That's the first time he ever, and only time I ever actually heard him kind of make mention of that this type of thing happened to him. So I'm sure it happened his whole life. Like I think even in the orphanage, Tracy, my dad and his sisters were the only Indigenous kids there. And I look at, there's some pictures I found a scrapbook of dad and like Bantam Junior A hockey championships in Prince Albert. And I look at, and you can tell he's the only Indigenous kid on the team. And so, you know, I'm sure he faced that his whole career, growing up and in the pros too, and his whole life. I'm sure he did. Yeah. But he didn't ever complain. He just, honestly, like before, except for that little story I told you, which wasn't a major complaint. He just was, you know, kind of sharing a little something with me, but that, you know, he never complained about it. He's, you know, my dad he was easygoing, and he just he did his thing. And I think he just, you know, probably learned really young in his life that you just got to keep going and not sweat everything.
Yeah, you'd think that we would have evolved as a society beyond this point by now. And, you know, I can only hope that evolution actually is attained at some point. But I'm sorry that, you know, that he had to go through that and you had to witness it, because when you're with someone you love that much and they go through something like that, it's really, really difficult, I imagine. Really difficult.
Yeah. And, you know, it was.
So how did your dad himself influence you? In what ways, Darcy?
Well, you know, you learn, I think when you're growing up, you don't really think about those things about what your parents, like, you know, they are your parents, and you know, you're guided by them, and they, you know, they support you and love you like they, you know, like your whole life they do that. And, but I think one of the, you know, my dad, you know, easygoing, and things I've learned now, and especially, you know, when I look, you know, as a, you know, and a lot of people know, you know, we lost dad in late 2020. And you really start thinking more and more, you know, reflecting on all of the lessons that you learn in your life, you know, from your dad. And, you know, I think, you know, I try to think that, you know, one thing is that you, like, to never give up. Like, honestly, like, I don't think my dad ever gave up. You know, he just, you know, I think of all the obstacles of growing up. Like, he had them all. Like, you name any, you know, living in an orphanage, no parental support, for all intents and purposes. You know, being Indigenous, you know, I'm sure, like, I'm sure there wasn't a lot of money. Like, he didn't have much, but he didn't let that get him down, and he just persevered, and he just, you know, he took what he got. Luckily, he was born with a lot of, you know, natural athletic ability, and he got to play hockey, and he got to do something he really loved. My dad was good at actually other sports, like lots of sports, but I guess most athletic people can do well in other sports, but he was, obviously, hockey was his sport. And so, you know, I think that, like, just like not to give up, and not to maybe look at, you know, like, woe is me, you know, this is, you can't, right? Like, because really, like, you know, I look at him, and if he can do what he did with really next to hardly any resources, even, like, he just had maybe, you know, he had some belief in himself, and, you know, a desire and a love of hockey just to play. And so, So, so that would be it. And I also, like I talked about gratitude, and, when we were growing up, and even long after, when we were grown-ups, and my dad was a grandpa at his 5 granddaughters, and he would come to visit us, and when we were kids, he would talk about like nothing, like what he would never complain about his life growing up, like ever. And he would just actually speak very positive about the orphanage, and like I said, I think some people might find that surprising, but he did, and that's it's just so true. And but he would just say to us sometimes, like, you kids, you just have no idea how lucky you are. But he wasn't saying that to compare. I think it was just, and he wouldn't talk about growing up. It was just like, I think he would just remind us sometimes, like, you have no idea. And I think sometimes we'd be sitting maybe in a nice restaurant in New York after a hockey game, and probably ordering pretty fancy food for little kids. Now I think, and Dad probably just sitting there like, can't believe this is my life. Like, these are my kids. And he thinks about what he had when he didn't have much growing up. So, so for us, my siblings and I, and hopefully our own kids, to just have gratitude for, what you have, and appreciate what you have. So I think those are maybe 2 really, really great lessons, and maybe sometimes just to find laughter in things, because he was funny, and I don't know, so I think, it's sometimes you got to just laugh.
That is absolutely the truth. What an incredible example the 3 of you have had. What would you say, Darcy, is your favorite memory with your dad?
My favorite memory? Oh, wow. Well, there's lots. It's hard to think of like your favorite.
You mentioned your long drives home from summer. We spoke. Would you say that's one of your favorites?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, for sure. Like that. Yeah. So, yeah, as a kid, and I've spoken this before. One thing that I always remembered and looked forward to a lot was at the end of hockey season, we would, our family would move back to Canada. We always had a family home in Saskatchewan, our summer home, and we would go there and enjoy our summers up north. And so I think once my brother was born, we used to be, my sister and I, mom and dad would drive to Canada, and then it wasn't enough room in the car, so my mom would take my brother and younger sister to in the plane, and then dad and I would drive. So we had a number of road trips from New York. So we would leave from New York and go to Prince Albert, Saskatchewan. In my memory, it took 4 days to get there. And we would stop. We had family friends in Indianapolis and Minnesota. And anyway, so we would we would have games and books, and I don't know, we would just be in the car just talking, like, when you have during hockey season, any kid whose dad played hockey they travel a lot. They're not around that, that's just part of the game. And so, your dad doesn't always see all the things you do, because they're away, and, that's not uncommon in today's world, I guess. But in those days, I think it was more uncommon. And so I kind of that just one-on-one time with your dad, that you just, we would, and have McDonald's for lunch and dinner and, just fun stuff like that, milkshakes for breakfast, whatever we did, so it was just really, it was fun. And then we did that. And then when dad got traded to California, we did that maybe once or twice too. So those were really fun, but just, so that definitely stands out. And just, lots of great visits. I think as we, and become adults, I think one of the greatest things I really enjoyed seeing, dad is becoming a grandpa, and he loved that. And so, and it's so, things like that, just general family get-togethers were always fun. He lived in Winnipeg, and I lived just outside of Toronto. So I didn't see him as much as I would have liked to, but we always loved having him here, and our family get-togethers in Saskatoon were always great. So yeah, so lots of good memories. We did some fun. I think there was one picture of Dad and I in a golf tournament. It was an NHL alumni golf tournament. And that was fun. And being a daughter, like some often dads would take their sons, but I don't think my brother was around to play. But anyways, so it was, yeah, we had fun. We did a lot of things like that, playing golf together, and not that much, but just doing things like that. Anything with like that growing up was fun. Yeah.
Yeah, the one-on-one time is it's invaluable. I think that's something very precious. Very quickly,
Yeah.
I know you and your siblings are on a mission. You have a quest to get your dad inducted into the Hockey Hall of Fame, and I think that's got to be a mission that's even more heartfelt now that you've lost him. And I'm so sorry about that. I've lost my dad too, and that's a very, very hard thing. My heart is with yours. But tell me about that quest. It's no easy task, is it?
No, it definitely isn't. And it's something that we, was on we kind of were talking about it for quite a few years, actually. And then you mentioned when you were introducing or talking about Dad's career earlier, that in, I think it was 2017, he was named the number 30 of top Rangers of all time. And I think we saw that in the hockey news. And I think we just decided, okay, we're going to do it. And so we just, we asked Dad's blessing, and he was quite taken aback. But, he was surprised, but I think he was happy that, he said, yes, you can do that. So we started putting together a proposal, and we have got lots of letters of support and lots of stats and data and, play. And so we've submitted it a couple of years prior to, I guess, the pandemic. And then in 2020, we lost Dad. And then the Hall of Fame skipped a year because of COVID. So this year in 2022 would be the first submission that we're putting forward. Not it's actually being put forward. Someone else is submitting it for us. But it will be the first one since Dad, since we lost Dad. So we've got a lot more support, and we really believe, Tracy, that Dad's, there's his career. He had a pretty amazing career, 4-time All-Star. He was a true defenseman in every sense of the word. And I think he's got the stats. It's not, the game has changed over the years, but I think during his era, he's got the stats to back him. But he also has a story that is, I think, and we've really learned this, not just since we lost Dad, but even since our first Hockey Hall of Fame submission in 2018, because we've realized that my dad's impact on Indigenous people is far, far greater than we ever knew. We had no idea. Again, Dad spent as a player and many years after, as a retired player, quietly going to reserves across Canada and talking to kids and meeting with them and just giving them words of encouragement. And so he did that for so many years. He gave of his time, and so he made a lot of contributions, and he just was a real hero, and far more than we ever realized. And I just think, I think that his story and his impact, not just on the game of hockey, but his impact on, Canadian Indigenous people, like across the country. And, I'm sure even people who weren't Indigenous would look at Dad's story and be pretty inspired by it. And those are the stories that need to be told. They're positive. They're it just shows you can do anything if you really, I can't believe you got all these pictures.
Our producer, Glenn Dreyfus, is a very resourceful man.
Yeah, no, they're amazing. There's Dad, right? He's signing autographs. But yeah, no, it just is a story that, I think transcend time and generations. Like it's my dad's story is unheard of, really, in sports, in any sport. And I think especially in current day, when you look at, the generate, like, no, that just wouldn't happen. It just doesn't. So, it's a good positive story of someone who made it when they had all the odds stacked against them.
Boy, oh boy, yeah, he is an inspiration. His story has definitely touched me, and you have too, Darcy. And I appreciate you sharing your heart with us tonight and your story and your family. Thank you so much.
Yeah, it's been a real pleasure and an honor to be on your rookie show.
Thanks. I appreciate you being here. That's for sure. All right, we'll come back to you at the end, so hang tight with us. But our next guest also knows a little something about a different kind of harsh treatment, one that comes from the crowd, and that can be a hard thing. Her dad, Ron Wilson, coached in the NHL for 21 years and is the winningest American hockey coach in league history. He's also listed in the top 10 coaches overall. Ron is my cousin as well. No coincidence with the same last name. He coached the Anaheim Ducks, the Washington Capitals, San Jose Sharks, and the Toronto Maple Leafs. And his daughter, Kristen Wilson Fisher, couldn't be with us live, but we did get a chance to catch up with her a little earlier. It's especially fun having you with us, Kristen, because we're family. So we share all kinds of history. Your grandfather is my uncle, and our families go back way, way, way long ago. And, what a storied career your dad has had. I mean, nearly 40 years in hockey, from college to international to the NHL, and the most successful American coach in history and one of the top 10 in the NHL. And his record is just long and storied. And so it's really fun to have you here to talk about your experiences growing up in a hockey family, which you've been part of before you were even born. I think it's pretty cool you spent some of your childhood in Switzerland, and some folks might forget that that's where your dad played after a few years in the NHL. What was that experience like for you and your family?
Yes, it was actually Brian Burke, who is my godfather. He had suggested or recommended to my dad to try to play hockey in Europe, since the NHL was getting much more physical and my father was not a large physical player. And in Europe, it was much more about speed and skill. So he found, I believe his first team was in Klosters, Switzerland, and we were only there for a season. I was about 2.5, 3 years old when we went, and my sister was just a baby. And after that, we would always return to Rhode Island, which became our home base. But then for the next, I think it was 5 or 6 years, he played for HCD, the hockey club of Davos, which I later found out was the location for the World Economic Forum. But I didn't know that at the time when I was little. We just thought of it as, we're going to Switzerland come August. We'd still get there. It would be the fall, and then we'd get to have the winters there. My sister, we'd go to a few hockey games. But there, the system was so different. My father was able to spend a lot of time with us, and the whole, because it was a small Swiss town, it's different now, but I went to school there, and we would come home every day for 2 hours. And so we would all be able to have lunch together. And on game days, we knew we had to be quiet because my dad was going to be taking a nap. And then I would go back to school. And then if it was like a Friday night, My mom would occasionally take my sister and I to the game, but since we were still so young, we didn't go to a lot of games, obviously during the week, but on a weekend we would. But I just thought it was normal. I was like, oh, everyone spends half the year in Switzerland and then spends half the year in the United States. And it wasn't until later I found out that that was not a normal childhood, but I'm very grateful that my parents decided to make that leap of faith, because we had so many amazing memories being able to live in Davos, Switzerland for so long.
Definitely a unique experience. Just anyone watching think, wow, what a glamorous life, being able to go back and forth to Switzerland. Let's kind of school them a little bit on what that meant for your mom in particular.
Oh, I specifically remember one year my mom having enough, and she just flew home with my sister and I. She didn't want to stay there. And we didn't have cell phones. There wasn't the internet. My dad had no idea what was going on. But I think back for her, what a commitment and challenge she had to go through, bringing two small children. My father got to go early. They always made the decision. The four of us never flew together in the event something were to happen. So occasionally, rarely, we would fly with my father. He would usually go first, and then my mom would fly with my sister and I, and she would be going to a foreign country, not knowing anyone, not speaking the language. Now I feel like most people around the world learn English, but then they did not. My mom did an amazing job. And for those of you who aren't aware, normally European foreign countries are allowed 2 foreigners. And by foreigners, they're American or Canadian. So my mom would at least have another North American wife that she could get to know. And we met amazing family friends who we're still in touch with, who we've gone to visit. They've come to visit us when they can. But it is hard adjusting from country to country, especially when you don't know the language. My sister and I, she was a little younger. I spent more time there. We did grow up speaking Swiss German. It was easier for us to learn being children and being thrown into the system. But for my father, he also learned quite quickly because he's with a bunch of Swiss players. For my mother, she really had to try a lot harder than the rest of us. But it was also my brain switching from English to German. I would always be a little behind whatever school I was in. I'd catch up and then we'd leave. And then when I'd go back to the States, I would suffer in grammar because I was, thinking in German. And then I would be ahead in math, and then I'd get used to everything, and then we'd be going back to Switzerland. And so, yes, it was an adjustment going back and forth.
Yeah, I mean, these are the nuancy things that, I don't know, I think on the outside looking in, it can all look glitz and glam and exciting. But there are some very real difficult things. And one of those you kind of hit on, and that's moving. With your dad having played and then coached in the NHL as well, there's a lot of moving, I remember, for your family. Mine too, so I relate to that. How did all that moving affect you?
Again, when I was young, for me, it didn't affect me as much as it did as I started to get older into like my adolescence, young teenage years, because you start to, you're forming friendships, and you get used to, being in a place. Or even I remember when we found out we weren't going to be going back to Switzerland anymore, it hits you, and you're trying to take in as much of the scenery, your friends, just the culture as you can, because you don't know the next time you'll be able to go back there. I have friends, even my husband, he claims he moved around a lot, but I said, but you moved in the same town. You're still able to see your friends. I was like, we are moving from country to country or from state to state. You can't see them anymore. But what I found was we were so used to moving. I was 12 years old when my father retired from playing hockey, but then he immediately entered coaching. And it was only 1 year where we stayed put. We were in Minnesota, and his first coaching position was with the Milwaukee Admirals, a minor league team. And since it was drivable, they let us stay just so we wouldn't have to start over again in another state. And that was for 1 year. But then he got his first NHL assistant coaching position in Vancouver, British Columbia, and we did do the big move. I always just thought I was able to keep in touch with friends that I loved and our family friends, like our neighbors. And then, as a teenager, people who you get annoyed with, you don't ever have to see them again. And it was always exciting. We were excited to move, to discover a new city together. And I think for all the other families that are out there that have similar experiences, a lot of people thought we were Army brats. But you get to do it as a family. So we're bonded in a special way because we're always starting over somewhere new, with no family help. It was exciting, but as we got older, it was also sad. I remember starting to feel like devastated when we had to move again. But it was always to another beautiful place. And as I got older, I realized we could always go back and visit these places, not like drive to, but I know I could eventually go back and see something. And it was always exciting to be able to discover a new part of the country or just experience a different lifestyle. Now I'm grateful that we were able to live in so many places, even though when I was younger, I was definitely envious of people who knew each other since kindergarten, which is now what my kids have.
I wonder what that's like, because like you, we moved a lot, and I didn't quite see the adventure of the move. I mean, I remember just sobbing every time my parents broke the news to us that we were going to a new city and leaving friends behind at a time when it was really hard to stay in touch. There was no social media. You couldn't text. It was writing letters or doing long distance phone calls, which were very much limited because of their calls, those calls of don't be on the phone too long. So that was a hard thing. And I think it has made me I sort of let go of things, move on. And sometimes I sort of wish I held on to older relationships a little bit better than I do.
And it's not, then that was the other, I remember being excited when like Facebook was coming out, or even before Facebook, I think it was like Classmates, because then I was able to stay in touch on a more regular basis. And now with social media and our smartphones, all these different apps, I'm still able to, it's so much easier to reconnect with people that I want to stay in touch with. But it is interesting now watching my girls. We've lived in the same place now for almost 10 years. And sometimes I go crazy thinking we've been here this long. I live in Tennessee now. And it wasn't ever a place I thought we would live. There was a small time when my father was still trying to coach, and he thought he may be up for the Nashville Predator coaching position. I was so excited because I was like, yes, we get to go to more hockey games again. But that didn't work out. But it's just interesting, being someplace, staying put. I get the bug. And my sister and I both, before we started our families, I did continue to move. And my parents kept asking, why do you want to keep moving? And I said, I don't understand why you don't understand, because you moved us all the time. It's hard to stay put when you're used to going places.
Yeah, I think it can have that effect or the opposite, depending on the person. Kind of like this question. A life in hockey can make you either love it or want to leave it. And I think your last reaction about that possibility of your dad being in Nashville at that time probably answers the question. So, hockey fan, yes?
Yes, we are definitely still hockey fans. However, since he has left the business, I still enjoy it. I love going to games when we get the opportunity to, but I don't follow it as religiously as I did when he was involved in the sport. I love, though, seeing or finding out when my friends' kids play hockey, especially, I don't know why, especially here in Tennessee, it's, I love the support that our local team has, and that it's becoming more popular in the South, in markets where you're not born and bred on hockey, where other sports are, take priority over everything else. Even, recently, this isn't hockey related, but basketball, I went to the same college as my father, and we did not have a football team. Football is very popular in the South. But we did have a hockey team and basketball. So our basketball team went far in March Madness this year. And our hockey team did really well also. So I get excited when people have heard of my college that I went to, because it is a good school, which my dad still holds a lot of records for. And just that hockey is becoming more popular here. So I am a hockey lover. My mom, on the other hand, she loved my father in high school playing hockey. In college, she loved it. And then I think because she was behind the scenes, she had enough hockey games. And I just remember her, especially as we were getting older, she would hang out in the wives' room, or if we were at a hockey game together, she would maybe be in our seats for a total of 10 minutes during the game. The rest of the game, she would be bouncing around, chit-chatting, visiting as many people as she could.
I have no difficulty imagining that, because your mom is she is such a sweetheart, and what a great conversationalist too. All right, before we run out of time, you and I bounced around a little bit in our private conversations about having dad as a coach and the crowds being somewhat ruthless. I was in high school, and I remember hearing the crowds chanting, "Goodbye, Johnny," Wilson, you suck, and thinking, that's my dad. I just want to stand up and yell, that is my father. How did you handle the booing of the crowds that was inevitable when your dad is a coach?
For me, and I think for my sister as well, I mean, he had coached 4 NHL teams, and it was the last team, his favorite team of all time. Like growing up, it was the team he was drafted, and then the first team he played for, and it came full circle, and it was the last team he coached, the Toronto Maple Leafs, which is like hockey town. So I feel like there, everyone loves and breathes hockey. That is the number one sport. And it was so stressful, so much pressure. And I remember, like, for us, I already had a daughter, and I remember the last year, and I had 2 daughters. I mean, I just had my second daughter, but I'd take Riley, who would be like, she was probably 3.5, 4, almost 5 years old, going to the games, and this was right before he got fired. And they would be chanting, "Fire Wilson," and then start clapping. And my daughter was like, are they talking about Grampy? And I was like, yes, yes, it's just, they're just a little frustrated. But I couldn't believe and we talked about this, previously before, but all these people choosing, to voice their opinions, which they have every right to. I'd always remind myself, I was like, these are the fans that love the sport, the reason why the NHL is still here. They put food on the table and a roof over our heads, but it would feel so hurtful. I was like, would you go around? What if I came into your dad's office at the bank and just started saying, your bank sucks? It's crazy. Yes. When you try to, put it in other situations. And even and for players too, when you hear someone just bashing a player, it's usually someone, I just think, can you skate 1 lap around the rink without passing out? It was hard listening to that. And especially for my daughter, like his granddaughter. And also when we were here, I remember my daughter was wearing a Toronto Maple Leaf t-shirt to soccer practice. And, the parents were coming. I was like, "Oh, you're a Toronto Maple Leafs fan?" She's like, "I used to be. My Grampy got fired." And everyone, was shocked. But for us, that was a regular thing. I was like, "Oh yes, my father has gotten fired several times. It's no big deal. He usually gets another job."
Yeah. So you didn't have a hard time handling. You guys were okay with it.
Yes, we adjusted, but it's still not a fun thing to listen to.
No, it's not fun. No, it's hard to watch your dad go through it too, because they try so hard, right? They're not in it to lose. They're competitive people who are in it to win. But before we run out of time, one last question for you. What's your favorite memory with your dad?
I think for us, my mom was definitely in charge. So, when my dad he was traveling a lot, but when he was home, he was home. So we would get to spend a lot of, I feel like almost more one-on-one time, even though he was gone so much, than some of my friends whose parents didn't travel at all. Because when he was home, my dad would just take my sister and I. We would go to the movies together. He would take me to the batting cage. I watched him get his eye sliced open. He would take us on road trips. When my mom was getting ready for the move, my dad would spend the time with my sister and I while he didn't have to work. I also know now, my mom, I was like, why doesn't mom ever want to come? That was her only time alone. And so, but I just have all these memories with our father, like him taking us ice skating or him taking us skiing when he had downtime. He was always fully present with us when he was not working, which I loved. And I think now it's very hard being fully present. It's one of my goals to have with my children is when we are together, I want to be there for them 100% of the time and support them in whatever they do.
Yeah. And that, putting down the phone, and we were lucky to grow up when the phones weren't even a thing. So being able to just I agree with you. I think my favorite times with my dad were those one-on-one times, just the two of us, or for you, just the three of you. Well, Kristen, thank you for being with us. Lots of love to your mom and dad and your family
Thank
too.
you.
And I appreciate you being here.
Thank you, Tracy.
Up in a widespread hockey family. You know, it's not just it wasn't just my dad being an NHL player and coach, Johnny Wilson, but his brother Larry, and then that set of cousins with Ron and his brothers. And now there's a third generation as well, with Brian Mahoney Wilson being the goaltending coach for the Grand Rapids Griffins, the Detroit Red Wings farm team. And someone who will relate very well to having a large hockey family is our next guest live with us, Wendy Mccreary. Wendy's dad, Keith, played left wing for 8 seasons in the Big Show with the Pittsburgh Penguins and Atlanta Flames. But one of his greatest accomplishments was the way that he fought for the NHL alumni. And I know my family so appreciated that. Now Wendy continues his legacy in doing the same. She's a VIP member of the Worldwide Who's Who for her work in alumni relations, and hers is a multi-dimensional hockey family. Wendy, it's not just your dad who made his mark in the game, is it?
No, we had a few from our family that have played in the NHL, Tracy. So it stems to my uncle, my dad's brother, Bill. His son, Bill Sr. played with St. Louis and coached the California Golden Seals. His son, Billy, played with Toronto Maple Leafs, and he was the one that checked Gretzky. So I think everybody remembers him when he was knocked out, unfortunately. His son played. He played with Providence, Rhode Island. And then my dad's sister's husband, Ron Atwell, played with the New York Rangers, and their son, Bob, played with Colorado Avalanche or the Colorado Rockies, actually. And then their daughter met her husband playing with the junior Peterborough Petes with Bob, her brother, and they married, and he played with the Washington Capitals. And then it stems on to my cousin, who had a long 15-year career in the NHL as a referee and has been inducted into the Hockey Hall of Fame. So we come from a pretty steady stable of hockey, and we all grew up and loved it.
Wow, that's a laundry list right there. I bet you have some stories to tell when you have reunions and get that group together.
We actually played in a family tournament. It was a winter carnival up in Trout Creek, just a little bit north of my dad's hometown. And so they wore the NHL Old Timers jerseys, and when they would come out on the ice, like every one of them, there were so many that played professionally that they got booed as soon as they came out onto this little rink that didn't have any boards. And it got so bad that the fans would actually grab their jerseys and start hitting them when they were playing in the tournament. But it was comical. They took it all in stride.
It's a good thing. Well, back in the day when my dad played, and even later when your dad played, I mean, the players didn't have a lot of rights. They didn't have a lot of say-so in their own lives. I mean, even to the point of when they could get married, except if you were Keith Mccreary, right?
Yeah, he did, Tracy. He decided that he would propose to my mom, and they were going to get married in November of the hockey season. And so he had to ask permission. He was playing with the Montreal Canadiens franchise, so he had to approach Sam Pollock and Scotty Bowman and ask permission to get married. And it was really funny when I hear this story, because my dad actually, they had to phone my mom's family and make sure that my mom's family would accept him into their family, and they approved of him. And once the phone call was made to her family and they did approve of him, then they gave permission for them to get married. So they throw them their Jack and Jill or their Stag and Doe. And unfortunately, because it was hockey season, they wouldn't let them take their honeymoon. So they bought them a trip to New York at the end of the hockey season for their honeymoon. I don't think my mom and dad ever took it, though. They didn't take them up on that one.
Well, the average groom-to-be has to just win the hand of, the father's approval.
Exactly.
But not so in hockey. And it's funny you bring up Scotty Bowman because we'll be talking with his daughter Alicia later in the show. And she's got some great stories of her own and some things I'm willing to bet anyone watching does not know. That, for
Sure.
instance, no one outside of hockey, no one really close to Scotty Bowman calls him Scotty. We'll find out more about that a little bit later, but I digress. You know,
That's great.
in pro sports, most players and their families are in towns without relatives, and until they get settled in and make friends, they don't have friends. So they become that. Those players and their families become that to one another. Was that your experience growing up as well?
Oh, absolutely. We used to start our school year, my sister and I, there's only the two of us, and she's my best friend because we spent so much time together, not just my sister, but my best friend. And we would start our school year. My mom and dad thought it was really important that that we had a roots and somewhere to come back to, and we had a foundation. And so they built a home in Bolton, just north of Toronto. And so we would start our school year while dad was at training camp. And then my mom and dad would pack up the trailer and have it ready. And then when my dad was finished training camp, he would call and we would move to wherever he was playing and we would enroll in school there. And then at the end of the season, we would finish the school year in wherever he was playing and come home and actually wrap up our school year in total back in Bolton where our roots were. So we really enjoyed doing it. It was a nice opportunity to meet so many new friends, and my sister and I are pretty outgoing. She wasn't when she was younger, but she's the bubbly effervescent one now. But we really enjoyed meeting a lot of new people, and we always lived in the same community as the families that were playing on Dad's team. We had the opportunity to play with and live in the community with the Hextalls. So we grew up with Ronald and Rodney and Tracy Hextall. They were very, very close friends of ours. The Bathgates, Sandy and Billy, Andy's children, and Merle. We were close to them. The Shacks, Eddie and Norma, and Kathy and Jimmy. So we had a great stable of support around us with all of the hockey families living in the same area.
That's a very special thing, and they rely on one another. Those families, they have to rely on one another because often they're kind of all they have.
Yeah.
You sent a picture in, and Glenn, I'm going to ask you to bring up the picture of the kids with the penguins. Wendy, tell us about this.
So we used to go to practice. That was one of the highlights of our lives, was going to practice with our dads. And so after practice, we would usually go to a restaurant or have lunch together. But when they would practice at Iceland, they had a little aquarium there, and they had the aquarium of real penguins. So we used to get to go in and see the penguins. So this is a picture of my sister and I and Rodney and Ronald Hextall, and I think the Fontaine boys were all in with the penguins, which was really cool. I mean, it's not often you get to spend time with the real penguins.
Yeah, the other penguins. What was it like being a hockey family in Atlanta? That was a short-lived team, but while you were there, hockey moved farther south than it had ever been. What was that like?
It's funny, Tracy, that you would bring that up. The fans were really different because they embraced it. They loved it. They were really excited about it. But I think a story I shared with you a few days ago was when we would go to the games, and we would only go, the afternoon games on the weekend, or some evenings we got to go during the week, but we always sat together. And so the kids were always together. And when we went to a couple of our first games, the organist would play the da-na-na-na-na, and you're waiting for everyone to yell charge, and they would yell go. They didn't know the difference. So it was na-na-na-na-na, go. And so all
that does not work.
Got together and started yelling charge. And by the end of the season, the whole crowd was yelling charge as opposed to yelling go. So it was pretty funny.
Well done on that educational effort. Yes, there is no go. It's only charge. Your dad had quite a few injuries toward the end of his career, his knee, his back. How did that affect his transition into retirement at 35 years old? And how did his retirement affect all of you at home?
So he went into the insurance business. So he had it structured that his kind of final year of his contract, he came home and he started looking. He knew that it was the end of his career. He didn't want it to be, of course, like any of them. They still feel that, you know, they never ever look to their career to end. They look for the next shift. And so unfortunately, his next shift went into the insurance business. And so when he retired, he worked with Sun Life Insurance, but it wasn't enough for him. As a leader, always a captain and a player rep, he was, you know, motivated and dedicated. And so he opened his own brokerage. Insurance, again, was not his forte. He loved being around his team because that's what he was, you know, they lose their identity, they lose their purpose, they lose their team. And so he was really missing his teammates. And so he brought his brother and nephew on to be the number crunchers in the insurance business. And he was the schmoozer. So he went out and met with people, but it was really different. He went into politics. It wasn't really the same as, you know, getting on the rink, getting on the ice and the crowd roaring and, you know, being with your teammates again. It was a different family. And so it was very, very difficult on him. It was hard on my mom. We watched them go through a lot of trials and tribulations. And as a family, we went through a lot. And I lost my dad. And so in doing that, I wrote him a letter. And I said, I really want my dad back. And so I took the letter and I put it on his pillow. And he read the letter. And he made the effort to make the change for our family because he recognized that it wasn't him, and it's not the person that he wanted to be. So it shifted in that time frame, and we saw a better father. We spent more time with him. He seemed to really start to embrace retirement because then he started doing things. My mom calls them his annuals. He would do his hockey tournaments and get back with his team again, and baseball tournaments and golf tournaments and all of the different things that were team oriented. And so his annuals became very important to him in his life. And my mom was very accepting of them because it gave her some space back again as well.
It's a really difficult transition. You go from being a part of something bigger than yourself, a part of a whole, and having this camaraderie, and these are your friends and your fellow warriors, and then all of a sudden it's just you, the individual, and it's a huge adjustment. But what's interesting about your dad is that he turned retirement into a quest for better lives for NHL alumni. He was co-founder of the Alumni Association, which is an amazing thing, a very much needed organization. How did that get started? How did he become involved in that?
So there were some players that launched a litigation against the NHL. I won't get into that because we're good partners with them. They've been wonderful to us. But it was brought on by Bobby Hall, Andy Bathgate, Eddie Shack, Alan Stanley, Gordie Howe, Carl Brewer, Bobby Baum was part of it, Leo Reese. And they asked my dad to be the spokesperson for them. And in doing that, he took on the responsibility of getting the information out to all of the players. And so we would sit in his office and we would do all the letters and send the mailings, etc. And as part of that, they would run golf tournaments. And Darcy's mom was actually very instrumental in the event management and execution of the golf tournaments to raise funds for the litigation for that. And as a result of them, they won their suit, doubled their pensions. And as a result of that, they became very galvanized as an organization, or as alumni. They felt that they really needed some sort of an association and a fraternity to work together and be connected again. So Dad was one of the founders of it. And so it was his heart and soul, along Andy Bathgate, Bobby Bond. They all felt, Eddie Shack, they all felt it was very, very important to have an organization that they could connect and be that team locker room again. And thus the Alumni Association was formulated. The NHL Players Association funded the seed money initially for it, and the NHL also came on board and funded funds for it as well. And we're both very supportive of the organization and continue to be as well.
How did that influence you?
Oh my goodness. Well, I got to go and take minutes of when they were going through the litigation. I went to all of the meetings and took minutes for them. Just watching the energy and the camaraderie that they showed one another doing that, it inspired me. And so when the inception of the organization of the NHL alumni was November of 1999, and in June of 2000, there were only two people. There was the executive director and another gal working there, and they felt that they needed more help. So my dad told me about the position. I was then working for the municipality and economic development. I quickly pivoted because hockey was my life. I loved it. I had a real passion for it. I watched all the things that my dad did for his teammates, and I wanted to make a difference too. So I applied for it. And in applying for it, I knew that, people would probably think that, well, she just got the job because of her father. Well, I had to work twice as hard, sometimes 3 times as hard, because I really wanted to garner respect and people to know that I deserved the job that I was working for. And so I worked extra hard, not only to make him proud, to make myself proud, but so that he could relinquish that sort of conversation and dialogue that I only got the job because he was part of the board of directors. So 22 years later, Tracy, I'm still there.
I think you've earned your spot. Yeah. It's what an incredible thing for you to carry on your dad's legacy. You're now senior director of the NHL Alumni Association and Transition Program. What does that entail? Tell me about that transition program, and what is the degree of difficulty for guys who are leaving this world of being, in the spotlight and having an extraordinary job, and then falling back to the rest of us mere mortals and living a more ordinary life?
Yeah, it's really difficult. They come out of the game. First of all, a lot of the guys retire and they don't know that they're going to retire. It's injury oriented. There may be some other things that occur. Their contract expires. Someone else takes their position. I mean, there's so many things that influence the decision that isn't sometimes, and the majority of time isn't theirs. So the first thing that they need to do is determine, what is my identity now as someone other than a hockey player? What's my purpose for getting out of bed? Who are my teammates now? Because I've lost my locker room. So we've really worked hard. Glenn Healy came on as our executive director 4 years ago, and his vision was to really angle that we were able to, rather than be reactive, that we could be proactive. And so with his vision, we've implemented a wonderful library of resources. So we have a social worker on board with us. We have a chief medical officer. So we have a digital resource Game Plan, our partner, who's our digital resource partner, under over 100 resource courses on that platform. We work closely with the NHL for funding. If somebody has an injury or a medical situation that they need to deal with and they don't have the financial assistance to do so, then we have that in place with the league as well to work with them to help them out. So there isn't anyone now that needs help, and the spouses as well. There isn't anyone that calls us that we aren't able to help if they want the help. It's a different story if they don't accept the help. It's really tough. It's the old cliche, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink. So we do what we can to help everybody. If they don't want it, it doesn't mean we turn their back on them. We do everything we possibly can to make them change their mind and get the help that they need to get them to a place that makes their tomorrow better than today.
Yeah, I hope you'll rejoin us on a later show and we'll delve more into that. That's a topic I'm particularly interested in. I think transitions in life are hard anyway, but this is a really massive one. So I think it would be really great for us to delve into that. I also want to delve into a story that you you didn't tell me the story, but you said, oh, there's a story here with bringing Howe and Lindsay together. And there was a picture that we saw a little earlier. Maybe we can bring that back. What's this? That's a great photo. I love seeing you in the middle of these two incredible, legendary men, Ted Lindsay and Gordie Howe. How did you bring them together?
I may get emotional on this. It was the year after my dad died, and the Detroit Red Wings alumni invited me to their alumni gala. And they called me. At the time, the president was Sean Byrne. He called me and he said, Wendy, we're doing this gala. He said, we've invited Ted and we've invited Gordy. And probably most hockey fans know that they had a falling out. I won't go into that, but they hadn't talked since they played together. And so they said they've agreed to come. They've agreed if we have them at different ends of the room. So they both sat in their own, one was in the east and one was in the west. So they happened to have these, the production line set of jerseys. They had 2 sets of jerseys and they were auctioning them. And so the bidding was going and my mind started working and I thought, there's got to be some way out of this, that there's some goodness that we can get them together. And so as the bidding went along, it got fairly substantial. And so the first thing I thought of is I started bidding, and I said, I asked, the auctioneer, who was Sean, I said, I would like to know, would you throw into, and would Ted and Gordy be amenable if I am successful in the bid, that we would bring them into our gala and they would sit with a corporate table, each of them at the same time, the same dinner. So he asked and they both agreed to it. And so we kept bidding and bidding. And so my last request was, if I'm successful, could I have a picture of Gordy and Ted together with the jerseys? And I thought at least that will get them closer and maybe talking. And so they agreed to that. And so at the end of the night, I was successful. And they said, Wendy, we'll do the photo, but we want you in the photo. And so they shook hands and they started chatting, and they've been talking ever since. So I went up to my hotel room after that happened that night, and I sat on my bed and I looked up at the sky, had a cry, and I said, that was for you, Dad.
Yeah, I like to think, Wendy, that maybe he had a little heavenly influence over that. Maybe we need to get you doing some of the peace negotiations that the world needs right now. Maybe you can bring those people together as well. Your dad, my heart goes out to you. Your dad lost his courageous battle with cancer in 2003, but he lives on in so many ways, including the Keith McCreary 7th Man Award that the Alumni Association gives to someone in the NHL family who has contributed a lot behind the scenes for a significant amount of time. In 2017, you were the first woman to win that award. And I mean, what an honor. I can't even imagine the emotion of that. What was that night like for you?
It was a blur. It was actually so special. I was so humbled and so honored for 2 reasons. It was in my dad's name, and just going back, my dad was alive when they voted, the chapter presidents and board of directors voted on renaming the award in honor of him. And so our dear friend Vic Hadfield had the honor of going to the hospital when my dad was in palliative care and telling him, and it was so emotional for my father. It was just so heartfelt. So thinking back on him being so emotional and so honored to have that award in his name as a tribute to him, and then me being selected by our chapter presidents through Wayne McBean and all of the chapter presidents, it was a complete. I can't even explain what an honor it was for me to receive that. It just meant the world to me. And what was really emotional is our dear friend Rob Ramage, who has not been in Toronto very often, agreed to come in and present the award to me. And when I saw him walk in the room, I had a really hard time controlling my emotions, but I couldn't turn my floodgate off. It was very, very special. It was an honor. It was an award that I received on behalf of myself, and I feel my father as well, and my family.
Very, very, very special. What would you say, Wendy, is the biggest lesson that your dad taught you?
Kindness. He was always a kind man. He was always, as I said, he was always a captain. He was always a player rep. He was always thoughtful of his teammates. He was always thoughtful of the families. And always made sure everyone was taken care of. He went over and above beyond what his role was to make sure that he took care of everybody on his team. It was kind of Glenn saying now, leave no man behind, because he never did. And so today I still hear stories from people, different teammates telling me things that he did for them, and how they viewed him as such a wonderful man. And even in our hometown, I hear stories of people that I'll talk to, or in passing in different areas, or they'll message me on Facebook and say, your dad was a great man. When our family couldn't afford groceries, we were in hard times, your dad would buy groceries and drop them off to our house. So he just did acts of kindness all the time. And it was one of the things that he and my mom both instilled in my sister and I, is go to bed at night, put your head on your pillow, and if you can get up in the morning and know that you did something good for somebody, then it was a good day.
It's a great lesson for all of us. Wendy, thank you. Wow, thank you. Really interesting to hear about not just your life growing up in hockey, but your adult life in hockey as well. And I hope you can hang around until the end of the show for one last little wrap up. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much for having me.
It's a great pleasure. I appreciate you. Thanks.
Thanks, Tracy.
Well, as Wendy mentioned, retirement can be hard, and it certainly wasn't easy for the father of our next guest, Mike Corrigan, who has played for the LA Kings, the Vancouver Canucks, Pittsburgh Penguins, also was an assistant coach for a while. And joining us is Michelle Corrigan Haddock to talk with us about her life in hockey as well as her dad's. Hi, Michelle. It's good to have you
Tracy.
here.
Thank
Michelle,
you for having me.
My dad coached your dad in the minors and helped get him on his feet moving into the NHL, and then again for the Pittsburgh Penguins. So it's hockey is a small world.
It is.
Well, your dad was playing for the Pens when he had a career-ending injury. What happened?
Just headed to a game one night, think it's just going to be a normal game. You come home, but in that case, he never came home because he ended up at the hospital. He broke his ankle, had pins and plates put in it, and never recovered to be able to play again.
And how did that affect him, your family, both emotionally and otherwise?
Emotionally, I think for him, it was devastating. That was his life. He left home at 13. We are from Ottawa. He left home at 13 to go to Toronto, to go to St. Mike's, and hockey was his life. So he was just devastated, but he was very proud to make that known that, he was having a hard time with it. And not only emotionally, but also financially. He had 4 kids. And like I said, this was all he knew. So at, I think 32 or 33 he was, now he's saying, okay, now what do I do? I have 4 children to support. I have a whole family to support. And, where do I go next? And so listening to Wendy's story with being involved with alumni, I think is wonderful. And I think that a lot of people don't realize, like Wendy had mentioned, that your career has ended and it wasn't planned. So what do you do next? Where do you go? And back then, there wasn't that avenue that he had to be able to go and talk to people, and that would help him and kind of guide him. So he, did it on his own. It eventually worked out, but it took a while.
Well, and what a shift in terms of your place in the world to go from being an NHL player with crowds of people cheering for you every night to being a car salesman, which was what he did for a while, right?
That was his first job after that. Yes, it was.
I mean, talk about a head spinning kind of change.
Exactly. Nothing he probably ever mentioned in his mouth ever before.
Yeah, yeah, something you don't anticipate, but there's not a lot of time to plan. These guys are so focused on getting to the NHL and then staying in the NHL that it tends to be, particularly in that era when there wasn't a lot of support for the players like there is now. It was a difficult thing to maintain that career, and then trying to figure out what you did next was something that was sort of, I don't know, for many it was a bit like planning a funeral. Who wants to do that? You know, you want to focus on what's happening and what's good. But your dad was fortunate because he didn't stay in the car sales business for long. He became an assistant coach. And if I'm not mistaken, I think that my dad brought him along in that in his last season with the Penguins. I think your dad helped and kind of learned the ropes of assistant coaching and then went on to continue doing that under Bob Johnson. Was there a difference for you as having a dad who was a player versus a dad who was a coach?
I would say probably a little bit. Obviously, there's a lot more pressure, as you know, with your dad, a lot more pressure being a coach than a player. A lot more time, I think, at the rink, watching film and, you know, discussing with other coaches of, you know, this, that, and the other. He did a lot of scouting, so he traveled a lot as well. So it was, yeah, it definitely was different.
Your dad was part of expansion, NHL expansion, and your family moved out to LA so he could play for the Kings. What was life like in Southern California with a brand new hockey team, particularly for you and your siblings and your mom at home?
Well, to be honest with you, I remember being there. As far as the expansion team and stuff, to me, I was probably, you know, too young to really realize what was going on. To me, that was just a job that my dad had, and that's what he went and did every day to, you know, make a living. So for me and our family, you know, hockey was normal for us. That wasn't anything special. We just thought that was like what dads did until you start talking to people. And then, you know, being in California, we had a lot of, you know, actors and actresses and singers. And we were fortunate enough to meet a lot of people that really were getting used to the sport being there and enjoying it and meeting the players. And we ended up having a lot of parties at our house and a lot of people coming over and, you know, playing guitars. And so there's a lot of stories that I could say, but I won't. But it was a lot of fun. But it definitely, you know, living in California in 4th or 5th grade wasn't the same as if I was 16.
Yeah, very true. But being on the West Coast made for long road trips and long periods of time with your dad gone. Some of those, I understand, came at rather inopportune moments. Would you like to tell us about that?
Well, we were chatting the other night, and I mentioned a story that, you know, when you're that young, there's certain things that you remember vividly, and there's certain things that you kind of remember, or maybe you don't even remember. But one of the things is my mom was pregnant with my little brother, the 4th child, and my dad was on the road. And prior to, you know, him being on the road, but just at the end of her pregnancy, you know, you have to figure out what the game plan is. So there was, you know, a piece of paper that sat in our house next to her bed and basically was like, okay, Michelle, if I go into labor, here's what you need to do. And it was phone numbers of, you know, some wives, and they were going to come over and take care of us and call 911 if they can't make it, because 2 of them were coming. One of them was going to babysit us. The other one was going to take my mom to the hospital. And if they can't make it, you have to call 911. And that's what happened. So, you know, here I am in 5th grade trying to stay calm and watch my mother in pain and, you know, dial phone numbers and let everybody know the baby's coming and, you know, what do I do? And, you know, everything worked out, and they finally got a hold of my dad on the road and let him know that my mom was in the hospital. And, you know, talk about being a family with the team, got off the plane, took half the team to the hospital with him with champagne and cigars, and walked in and, was able to see his first son for the first time.
Well, and players in that era didn't miss games. They didn't miss games for the birth of their children, and often they didn't even miss games for the funeral of a parent. I mean, it was just hockey came first. Only recently
Absolutely.
has that changed. What was the best part of growing up in a pro sports family?
Well, I think we were definitely fortunate to have, some things that maybe other people otherwise wouldn't be able to have. But I don't know. I think for us, it was just, like I said before, it was just kind of second nature. It was that I didn't ever thought of my dad as like this big star, and everybody would come up to us and be like, "Oh my gosh, your dad plays hockey." And I'd be like, "Yeah, so what?" Like it just was, I don't know, it just wasn't that big of a deal for us. Because he was just our dad. So it's totally a different perspective when somebody else is looking in than when you're dealing with it, every single day. For us, it was more of, oh, you're on the road again, or dad's gone again, and, mom taking care of 4 kids, or, him being traded and my mom crying for 5 days because she's moving from California to Pittsburgh. And now she's got to, basically take care of all the kids, pack the house, get the house sold. Well, they move on. They don't, once he's traded, like they move on, they're gone. They don't know really, what's left behind. So it's not a glamorous life as I think most people would think that it is.
No, I mean, God bless our moms. I think about what they had to deal with, and it's not easy. You're often a single parent, and the moving. For me, I think the moving was the hardest part. Would you agree with that, or was there something that was
Absolutely.
harder than that for you?
No, I think the moving is tough, and I was the oldest of 4 kids. So for me, I just felt there was a lot of responsibility put on me as well with my mom, just trying to help out and be that extra hand because, our dads are gone, and they're, yeah, wives help and stuff, but it's still just an emotional, as well as physical, of trying to get everybody situated, getting as simple as school records, doctor records, all these things for your 4 kids to then take with you to find all that new stuff when you're moving to the next state. So there's a lot of stuff that goes into it that a lot of people just don't realize, that it's not all, just glamorous.
No, it's definitely a high degree of difficulty, and the wives are left doing the lion's share of it for sure. What's
Absolutely.
what's your favorite memory with your dad?
I have I've a few, but I'd say probably the summertime. When he was playing before we actually got our green cards and stuff, we just had our working visa. So when we got out of school, we actually had to go back to Canada, and so we had a cottage on a lake, and every summer we would go back there. And I think it was just kind of that feeling where your dad is now just your dad. There was no hockey involved, and he got to be himself and enjoy the family, and go boating and fishing and skiing and have bonfires at night, where that became like, where kind of you feel like that was like a normal family, what they did. For us, it wasn't like that. So during the summer, those kind of things were just, that was our family time, because between September and April, we didn't get a whole lot of family time. So it was just nice to kind of see him be able to relax and be himself and not have the pressure, whether it was playing or, coaching. But also Christmas. And I know we spent some Christmases together because we used to go Christmas caroling.
Yes, we did.
And I guess that didn't work out because we're not singers, so that didn't work out very well, I guess. But
No.
so Christmas was always a big holiday for my dad, and getting up Christmas morning with the 4 kids, that was just one of his favorites, and it still is. I mean, he puts the little Christmas hat on and loves to hand out the gifts to his grandkids and his great grandkids now. But his love of life right now just continuously make fond memories for us and my sisters and my brother, because my dad is like, he loves life to know. I mean, it boggles my mind sometimes of just how happy he is all the time, and how he golfs all the time, and he's always with people, and he'll talk to anybody. He will talk to anybody about anything, anywhere. There's never a time where we go somewhere that he, doesn't meet somebody and they're exchanging phone numbers. He's always handing out pictures and pucks, and he's always loved the sport, and he will continue to praise on it and talk about it. And he loves to just go back down memory lane with whoever will listen to him, really.
He's a fun guy. Definitely a fun guy.
Yeah, he sure is.
I have so many fond memories at the cottage with your family. I think we went maybe 1 or 2 summers and spent some time with you guys there. It was just really, really terrific. Hockey is family in many ways.
Absolutely.
Michelle, thank you so much for being with us, and hang around till the bitter end if you can. We've got one more interview to go. So thank you. I appreciate you being here and sharing your story with us.
Thanks, Tracy.
Our next guest is the daughter of literally a living sports legend, Scotty Bowman. He is the winningest coach in NHL history, and he has shattered just about every coaching record. And he has won an outlandish number of Stanley Cups. His NHL travels took him to the St. Louis Blues, the Montreal Canadiens, the Buffalo Sabres, the Pittsburgh Penguins, Detroit Red Wings, as well as the Chicago Blackhawks as a consultant, and God knows I'm probably missing something else. He's considered one of the best coaches in any sport, in any era. And tonight we have the pleasure of learning about life with Scotty from his daughter, Alicia DiGiulio, who we caught up with on tape a little earlier. So Alicia is here from her parents' house, ironically, in Florida, and it's great to have you with us. I'm kind of curious about this. People think they know the man. The fans think they know the players. They think they know the coach because they've heard the interviews. They've been at the games. They've watched. How would you say Scotty, the coach, compares with Scotty, the dad?
2 totally different people.
How so?
My dad never really brought work home. So even though that was such a huge part of our lives, we didn't really talk about hockey a lot. And my relationship with him specifically isn't geared around hockey. My brothers definitely talk hockey with him. And I have nephews and a niece who play hockey. And I don't know how much hockey they talk with him specifically, but my dad, in my mind, is Scott Bowman, not Scotty Bowman. And the person that he was with us at home, especially during the summers, because the summers were often 3 to 3.5 months long, depending on how long the season went. And it was just family time, doing the things that we wanted to do. My dad, the things that, there's certain parts of his personality, I suppose, are a little similar when he's with family. He can have a short temper. But those things that I would read in the newspapers and the things that would be said about him, I didn't know who that person was, because my experiences of him, he is very kind, very generous, very personable, will talk to anybody, is interested in many different things. And the focus of that is often not hockey.
Well, we've certainly seen that side of him on Hockey Time Machine. He's been gracious enough to join as a guest several times, and each time has been nothing but delightful and the man you just described. All right, I'm curious, everyone knows him as Scotty. So my dad was the same. The hockey world called him Johnny. My mom, the relatives all called him John. Is it the same kind of thing with your dad, with Scotty?
Absolutely. The people who are closest to him call him Scott. He was always Uncle Scott. Within our family, my mom calls him Scott. Usually when I refer to him as Scott Bowman, not Scotty Bowman. But if I'm trying to make a connection with someone who might know, like for instance, I was in a department store here a few days ago, and I heard a couple speaking French, and I could tell it was Quebecois French. And so I started speaking to them, and come to find out, I said, "Oh, you're from Montreal." I said, "You probably know my dad." I said, "My dad is Scotty Bowman." And I used the Scotty then because I knew that's how they would reference him. And then the gentleman who didn't speak any English said, "Scotty Bowman?" Yes, that is him. So those of us who are close to him and who know him, he is Scott.
Very good. What was your childhood like as the daughter of an NHL coach?
It was wonderful. I mean, it didn't hurt that he was a winning coach, right?
I can attest to that. It really did not hurt that he was a winning coach.
Yeah. But that, for me, those first 5 cups were from, up until I was 9 years old. So I was a child. And I remember things about the Canadians. I remember the parades. I remember a lot of family time because we had relatives who lived in Montreal. The time in Buffalo was difficult. It wasn't as successful, and for him, career-wise, but it was my home. That's where we lived. That's where my parents still have their house. So we have never left Buffalo, so to speak, from the time we arrived in 1979. And I would say for me personally, the Buffalo years were some of the best because I was able to go to all of those games. I was not ages 9 to 16. I got to bring friends to the games. I got to sit in the press box. We had games Wednesday, Friday, and Sunday nights. And as long as my homework was done, I got to go to all of those home games with my brother Stan and my mom. We had 6 great seats, and it was a lot of fun. The team wasn't as successful in that time period. So when he lost his job in, I think, 1986, I was a teenager, and my concern was, oh my gosh, are we going to have to move? Are we going to have to leave where we are, where my friends were and, my life was? And we never left. My dad, he went on to do color commentary for Hockey Night in Canada. He went on to work for the Penguins, Red Wings, Blackhawks, and we've stayed with our family home in Buffalo.
And you know how amazing that is, right? For the rest of
I know. It's unbelievable that our home base got to stay that one place. And it was a huge sacrifice on his part because selfishly, he could have moved us, right?
Yeah,
Could have moved us to Pittsburgh. He lived in a hotel in Pittsburgh. He could have moved us to Michigan, although, I was out of the house. I just graduated. I was married at that point. I think the most fun that I had were the Detroit Red Wing years because I was an adult. I lived an hour away with my husband in Michigan, in Lansing, and we went to every single game. And they were our team. They're still our team in some ways. Those were just so much fun. Those games, those experiences. The people were amazing. The fans. So to me, the best experience was really Detroit.
Yeah, the Detroit fans are fantastic. I mean, my dad played and coached there, so we have that shared experience, you and I. Although my dad didn't have the successes there that your dad had as a coach, he did as a player for sure. And it is called Hockey Town for a reason.
It is.
All right, you mentioned he lived in a hotel for how long?
I think it was 2 years. I think the first year, if I'm remembering correctly, in Pittsburgh, he was a consultant. Bob Johnson was the coach. They won the cup. That was a ton of fun. Our family was a little on the outside though, because he was doing that as a consulting job, living in a hotel. We were still in Buffalo in various degrees of education. And so we would come for games. We were there for the playoffs, all the fun celebration, but he wasn't the coach. So it wasn't really his team per se. And then Bob Johnson was sick with melanoma, and my dad took over as the coach for him. And they ended up winning that next year. I was in Montreal on a study abroad experience, so I was not really that in touch with that team at that time. I would watch the games when I could see them, but I wasn't going back and forth to Pittsburgh at that time until playoffs. And then once that happened, we would usually go to visit him. But I think both of those years, and possibly the year after, because I think he coached a second year there, he was in a hotel. I think it was called the Vista Hotel. And we would visit him, and, you can just imagine what hotel life was like. He wasn't cooking. He was going out to eat all the time. He was just hanging out with his hockey people. My mom would go visit him there. I think my siblings were probably in high school at the time. And it was just a different way of life. My dad, whenever he got an opportunity to come home, he came home. And that meant that if there was a game in Pittsburgh, sometimes he would get in the car, drive to Buffalo, which would put him home like 3 a.m. And then he'd get up the next morning and he'd have breakfast with us. He'd be with us a few hours. If it was a Sunday, we'd go to church together. And then he would get in the car and go back to Pittsburgh.
Yeah, and keep in mind, he wasn't 29 years old at that time either.
No, my gosh.
Even more.
No, he was like late 50s probably would be my guess. And he did the same thing, like on spring breaks. He never came with us on spring break, even though they have this beautiful place in Florida. Of course, spring break time is playoff time. Yep. And so if things were going well, he was not available. But if he had 24 hours, it was not unusual for him to fly down and have a day with us or part of a day with us and then fly off to wherever he needed to be.
Okay, we're giving your dad all these accolades, but I bring your mother into this because 5 children, one with special needs, which requires more of us when we are in that kind of a situation. How did she manage? I mean, I remember my mom had a few winters on her own when my dad would go off to coach, and for various reasons that were school related, we would stay behind. But how did your mom do that for such a long time with 5 of you?
My mom is amazing, and anyone who knows our family and knows her would tell you she's the backbone behind everything, although she's so quiet about it and would never, ever take any of the credit for it. She kept everything going. 4 kids at home, very busy in activities, lots of different things going on. She managed all of that. She was still very involved with my brother, David, and his care. We would travel to see my dad all the time. When he was in Detroit, she would travel herself back and forth to visit him. So she would go, when they would be in town for home games, she would go for a period of time. And then when they would go on the road, like for a week or something, she'd go back to Buffalo. So Buffalo was always her home base. She is so patient. She is so kind. And she, I think, really thought of her role as supporting him and supporting all of us in a very quiet way.
She sounds like a very selfless woman.
She is. And when she met him in St. Louis in the late 60s, expansion team, she had never heard of hockey.
Oh, well, she got quite the education.
Yeah, she had no idea what she was getting into. I mean, neither of them could have really known where it was going to all go, right? But all these teams and all this travel, and my mom has never complained, ever.
Bless her. That's what a role model you've had in the 2 of them, really.
Yes.
All right, you mentioned the whole Buffalo era. It's hard to look back and believe that the most successful coach in hockey was once fired. And of course, as you mentioned, in Buffalo. How did that affect your family, and how did that affect your dad?
That was a hit.
It
You
is.
know, he really wanted to be a general manager. From what I understand, it wasn't going to be an opportunity in Montreal. So the decision to move to Buffalo was a huge one. He had the opportunity to be the general manager and the coach, and then he would sometimes have other coaches who came in and he would just do general manager. But the move itself was a big one. He was leaving his hometown. He was leaving his parents. He was very close to them, other relatives. And then one of the biggest concerns was moving my brother David, where he was 8 years old and he only knew what he knew as far as life in Montreal. Come to find out that the move to Buffalo was the best move for him because the care that he received in New York was amazing. And he developed in ways that he wouldn't have been able to had we stayed there, but we didn't know that at the time. So the time in Buffalo was very promising. We were all excited. We were excited to be in the US. Things were really different. And you know, as a kid, or even as like a young teenager, socially, it was a lot of fun. Being with the Sabres, going to the games, all of that was very positive. The problem would be when we would read the newspaper. And I don't know that my youngest brother and sister really did that. I know Stan and I did. But we would read the newspaper. There was a writer who did not like my dad, Jim Kelly, and he wrote all kinds of things. And it used to frustrate us because we knew a lot of it wasn't true. And at one point I wrote him a letter. I think I was like 13. I sent him a letter. I don't even know what it said, but I remember writing him a letter, telling him all these awful, telling him how awful it was that he was saying all these things about my dad that weren't true.
Good for you.
He did not reply to me, but I at least felt like I had done my part to say, like, this is not okay.
Did you feel like you let up a little bit after that?
No.
No.
No, not at all. And, living, it was really our only experience living in a city where he was a coach, because Montreal, we were just young kids, right? We weren't watching the news or reading the newspaper or anything. It was also a winning time in Montreal. So it was a lot of positive, anywhere you went, it was something positive. So Buffalo was a different experience. But the people that we surrounded ourselves with, our friends, they didn't really care, whether he was winning or whether he was losing. But when he actually lost his job, it was in December. I'm pretty sure it was 1986. My mom heard it on the radio. She was driving and she heard it announced on the radio because, of course, no cell phones, right?
Right.
And she called my high school and talked to my principal and told her that I needed to come home immediately and didn't give a reason why.
Oh, no.
And I needed to pick up my brother on the way because his high school is down the street. And the reason was they wanted us home before the media came. But I didn't know what that meant. I didn't know. I said to my mom recently, I said, I probably thought somebody had died because what else would there have been, right? It wasn't on my radar that he would have been fired. And I can remember my dad not saying very much, not really having a plan, because what was the plan going to be? And we went on a trip. We took a trip to New York City. It was December, so it was probably before Christmas. We took the train there and we just had a lot of fun. And we went shopping and did sightseeing. And when we came back, it was like we didn't really worry about it or think about it anymore. It was very different because he was there and he was home. But we didn't really talk about it. It wasn't really the focus, I guess, at least to us kids, it wasn't the focus.
Well, what a great way to put all of your young minds at ease. That was probably a strategic move on your parents' part. They sound like they were very thoughtful about their parenting.
Mhm.
All right, so you not only had the media to deal with and the fans, but in today's world now, there's also this whole, the crowd never goes away because of social media, and your family has experienced that in the last while. And how do you think that has changed things for families like yours?
Well, it's not changed it for the good.
No, I agree with you.
I limit what I allow myself to read. A lot of things that were happening in the fall with my brother Stan, I just had to stop reading things because, for one thing, we know a lot of it's not true. And that's the most frustrating part is you as a family member, you don't have any voice. You can't correct the truths or the mistruths and make them truthful. I can't imagine what it would be like right now to have my dad as a player or a coach and have to have the 24/7 opinions of anyone and everyone, right? It's not just the media, it's Twitter, it's Facebook, it's Instagram. It's like whoever wants to post whatever they want to post about a person, about a team. And we are very truthful people. And so when there's so much out there that is untrue, it's really hard to even read it, honestly.
Well, and it's never ending too. You could find yourself fighting those battles all day long and getting nowhere, like a rat on a wheel, just running and running.
Right.
Yeah.
I think about how frustrated I would get reading a little article in the Buffalo News. It was like one writer, at the time, that's all they had covering hockey. And I would also read the hockey news cover to cover because we got that as a subscription. But that wasn't really focused on my dad, and that wasn't really negative per se. It seems like everywhere there's always that writer in each city, probably, because I can think of them in other cities too, where they just write some things and you think, how can you do that? It's not true. You're bringing up things, kind of just guessing. You're planting seeds that aren't going to actually turn into anything, but it gets the fans all riled up. And as a family member, that's really hard.
Yeah, that is really hard. Well, if there was ever a time to not read your own press, this is it, whatever media form that comes in. You sent to us just this array of nostalgic, wonderful photos from your upbringing. What would you say is your favorite memory with your dad?
Time at our farm, actually. So that would be like in the first 9 years. We had a farm in Granby, Quebec. It was like probably 45 minutes from where we lived. And we went there in the winter when he would have some time off, and we would snowmobile and we would do maple syrup and just cross-country skiing and all that kind of stuff. But the summer was the time that we really loved there. And I think a number of those pictures are from the farm. We had a lot of animals. We had a pool. We had a huge garden. Obviously, no technology. So everything that I don't even know if we had a TV. I don't remember watching any television there. Everything we did was together, was outside. It was very simple. I had a pony. We used to go on pony rides. We had a lot of cows, and we just enjoyed our time there. We would have different family come, different friends come. My dad would do the haying, would help people, who he had hired to do it, and he would participate in that. And just all that time in the summer, relaxing, being together. Those are probably my favorite memories.
Yeah, that one-on-one time too. It's very special. We've been talking about
we went and took a family trip in 2014. So my husband, we took our daughters and my parents. Actually, my parents really are the ones who took us on this trip. And it was a trip down memory lane. We got to see all these places where we lived. We went to the farm, and I will say my daughters were kind of underwhelmed by the farm. I think I had in my mind talked it up so much, but of course, all it is right now is a building, right? I don't even think the house is being used as a house anymore. But seeing it, it was such an emotional feeling, thinking of all the memories.
When those years are that special and such a time of togetherness too, it's hard not to get emotional and nostalgic about it.
Right.
All right. So we were counting before we came on here, you and I, and with the help of our esteemed producer, Glenn Dreyfus, how many Stanley Cups your dad has in his, huge, he needs a walk-in closet for them all. This isn't just like one little shelf.
They're in a cabinet. 14
of them. Does it ever get old?
It never gets old. I think, you know, I don't remember much about the Montreal ones, like those 5, just because I was so young. I do remember being in a few of the parades, and that was amazing because in Montreal, people just were crazy. It was in the city, all this confetti falling down. We were in these open air Jeeps, and Stan and I remember we'd be allowed to ride for a certain period of time. And then one of my dad's friends would get us and like take us off because it was too much to do the whole thing. The Pittsburgh Cups were great. They really celebrated in a fun way. Got to go to Mario Lemieux's house and got to be a part of that celebration, which was just the team. And it was just all kinds of fun. But the favorite ones are probably the Red Wings, probably 97, the first Red Wings Cup, because it just seemed like everything came together. And the parades, that never gets old, being a part of that and seeing all those people. I know that I somewhere have a video sitting in the car in the parade and videoing just the fans as we would go by, because they were enthusiastic and just like they thought it was the best thing ever. And you never take it for granted. We've had parties at my parents' house in Buffalo. And so even after like the Blackhawks, everyone gets their day with the cup, right? So my dad would get his day with the cup. And so we've had the parties in their backyard in Buffalo. The last one I think was 2015. My brother David with special needs, he comes to that party. So we have him with the Stanley Cup.
Excellent.
We have a lot of different friends and family who've traveled from different places. We live in Indiana. We've had friends come from Indiana. We've had friends come from all kinds of other places to have their picture taken with the cup in the backyard in Buffalo.
What a fun thing. All right. I can't help but wonder if your dad is the winningest coach in the NHL, perhaps because of his superstitions. Tell me about the superstitious side of Scotty Bowman. Hockey question.
I mean, I don't see it as much from him now. So I think it was more of a competitive thing. I know he had a lucky comb. This is going back to Montreal. I know he had a comb that he used, and there was something about like he only used that comb. I know that he had something going on with shirts because one time the story goes that he was wearing some shirt and my mom, like, I think took it to the dry cleaner or something like that. And they had to go somehow retrieve it so he could have it to wear for the next game because it was the lucky shirt.
At least he let her wash it.
At least he did let her wash it, right? He had, I believe that he had a lot of routines that he would do things a certain way. I don't know what all of those were, but he had a routine, like a pre-game type routine. So what he would do the day of a game. I know that if he went to a certain place, let's say for breakfast or for lunch the day of a game, and then they won, maybe he would then go back to that same place the next day. Like he did a lot of pattern things like that. The one thing, he does not like the number 13 at all. And never has liked 13. Therefore, I don't like 13. Like I got married on July 20th. I knew July 13th was never an option for a wedding. And I'm pretty sure, this is really trying to tax my memory, but I think that the win with Detroit in 1997, I believe it was June 13th, which just blew us away that, you know, number one, that it's so late in June, but number two, that he could win on the 13th. Like that, one of the cups I know was on the 13th. I think it was the 97 one. He would have this idea that hotels would often not number a floor 13. So it would go from 12 to 14 because people didn't like to stay on 13. He would never stay on floor 14 because he knew that was really floor 13.
Maybe that June 13th would have convinced him that 13 was a lucky number.
Well, that's what we thought. That's what we thought. Like maybe that's going to change things. He's not like that now, at least not in a visible way. Doesn't talk about things like that. but I still, I mean, the 13, the number 13 is not a number that I would pick for anything.
But those things you described are such a classic hockey player, hockey coach thing, you know, where they'll put on their hockey pants, you know, left leg first, or they'll tie their skate with the right skate first, or it's all patterns and super.
Yes.
So I think that's just kind of part of the culture.
Yes. And I'm sure I'm forgetting some of them, but like I can remember that, the comb, the shirt, 13, and his routines, like certain things, like you didn't mess with the routine if things were going well. And luckily for him, things went well a lot of the time.
Yeah, I remember my dad talking about being on a scoring drought when he was playing for the Red Wings and driving a different way from Windsor to come across the border to Detroit to play, just to try to change something up.
Change something up. So yes, I'm sure my dad could give me all kinds of other examples of things that he was doing, because I'm sure he would remember them. He has an unbelievable memory.
One last quick question. What's the best advice your dad ever gave you?
Wow, that's a hard one. I think, I don't know if it was advice as much as a way of following him. So if I look at him as an example, this idea that you work hard no matter what. So there's that work ethic involved, there's perseverance. You know, he hasn't said this to me, but this idea that if you love something, age does not matter. You just keep doing it. I mean, he's 88 years old and he's still, you know, a consultant scout, whatever his role is with Chicago. You know, he's still quote unquote working. He's still going to games. So I think not necessarily words of advice, but a way of living of, if you love what you do, it doesn't matter what age you are. You know, when he started in Detroit, he was probably about 60, 61. You know, that's to be starting a new team, to be starting a new series. You know, he stayed with them until 2002. To be doing that when you're in your 60s, most people, they're looking at like, this is wind down time, right? This is time to be retiring. And for him, he's never thought about anything limiting him, including age. And so I kind of have taken that myself. I started a totally new career at age 42. Had to go back to school. Didn't really make a lot of sense at the time. But when you have a role model who's doing things, you know, well into his 80s, you think you can kind of pursue anything that you want to pursue as long as you're willing to work hard for it, if it's something you think you're going to enjoy.
Yeah, that's terrific. And I think too, it's what keeps people young. You know, having purpose is important and doing something you love is important. And what a gift to, not just to your dad that he has found that, but to all of you as well. Alicia, I can't thank you enough for taking some time. I know you're on vacation, you're trying to make the most of the time with your mom and dad, but thank you for stepping off the beach and coming and spending some time with us. And
thank you.
Give your parents our best, and thank you, thank you, thank you. Alicia is celebrating her daughter's 18th birthday with her mom and dad in Florida, so I hope that has been just a terrific night for all of them. Scott Bowman and the Lucky Comb, things you'll only learn here on Hockey Time Machine. I love those photos too, those nostalgic photos that all of you have brought. Let's bring back Darcy, Michelle, and Wendy. And I just want to say thank you for bringing all the photos and all the stories and just a delightful evening. But one last quick question, daughter to daughter here. Crush or no crush on the players that your dad was associated with as a player?
Definite crushes.
Definite crushes. Yeah.
Yeah. How could you not have crushes?
Mm-hmm.
They were pretty good looking, pretty special guys.
Yes. I appreciate you all being here. Thank you. It just has been a fun night, and thanks for making my rookie night such a great one. Thank you to you three, plus also, of course, to Kristen and Alicia. And there is an after party, so anyone who's tuning in and wants to come and have a conversation about this later, there is much more to be said, and the Zoom link will be contained somewhere in this YouTube comments area, so you can look for that and come and join us, and we'll continue the hockey chit chat. It's a lot of fun. It's very casual, so I hope that that some of you will come and join us. And big thanks to Glenn Dreyfus. Without him, we wouldn't have photos, and we wouldn't have recorded interviews, and he's just a dynamite producer. So Glenn, thank you for making all of us shine tonight. We appreciate you a lot. And then big thanks as well to Paul Patsko and to Laura Evans, the executive producers who had this great idea a couple of years ago and have kept it going. Until the next time, enjoy the game.